The alarm did not wait for me to wake up properly. It tore through the bunker like a living thing, red light pulsing across the metal walls, and I was already on my feet before my mind caught up with my body. "Ethan, they broke the outer shield," Grace shouted from the comm station. My sister's voice cracked, not from fear, but from exhaustion. We had been awake for 2 days straight. I am Ethan Marsh, and on that day, on the colony world of Ardent Hollow, I watched humanity lose everything we thought we had built. The Thren compact ships hung in the sky, like dark clouds that refused to move. 3 of them. That was all it took to break a colony of 40,000 people. Their weapons did not roar like ours. They simply erased things. A building would be there one moment, and then it would not exist at all, as if it had never been placed on that ground. "Get to the transport bay," Grace said, pulling data drives from the terminal. "Command wants everyone in the last 3 ships." "There are people still in Sector 4, I said. "There is no more Sector 4. I did not argue with her. There was no time to argue with anything anymore. We ran through corridors filled with smoke and static, past soldiers who were younger than me, holding weapons they barely understood because the war had come faster than our training had. 6 months. That is how long it took for the Thren Compact to turn our best-defended colony into a graveyard of broken steel. 6 months since their first ship arrived at the edge of our solar system, offering what they called guidance, and receiving, instead, refusal. We wanted to be free. They wanted us to kneel. War followed naturally after that. We reached the transport bay just as another impact shook the ground. Dust rained down from the ceiling. I grabbed Grace's arm and pulled her toward the loading ramp of the last shuttle, where Colonel Laura Bennett stood shouting orders, her face streaked with dirt, her uniform torn at the shoulder. "Marsh, move it!" she called out. I pushed Grace ahead of me, and that single decision would follow me for the rest of my life. The ship above us, one of the 3 Thren vessels, turned its attention toward the transport bay. I do not know if it saw us as a threat or simply as something convenient to remove. The light came down without warning, without sound, without any of the drama we imagined battles to have. One moment, Grace was 3 steps ahead of me, reaching for the ramp. The next moment, the space where she stood was simply gone, along with the ramp, along with 12 other people boarding beside her. I do not remember screaming. Colonel Bennett told me later that I did. I remember only the sudden absence, the way the world can take something from you so cleanly that your mind refuses to accept it happened. Someone pulled me backward into the second shuttle. I do not know who. My legs stopped working properly for a while after that. I sat on the floor of that ship as it lifted away from Ardent Hollow, watching through the small window as the colony I had called home for 19 years disappeared into smoke and dying light. We were not the only ship that left that day. Across our system, similar shuttles carried similar survivors away from similar ruins. Humanity's grand defense fleet, the one our leaders had promised would hold the line, existed now only in scattered pieces drifting through the dark. 3 days later, every screen across human space played the same broadcast. The Thren Compact wanted us to see it. They wanted us to understand what had happened, and more than that, they wanted us to feel small. A Thren commander stood before the cameras, tall and pale, dressed in ceremonial layers of deep violet cloth. His voice, translated into calm and, even English, carried no anger, only amusement. The species called humanity believed itself capable of standing against civilizations older than your written history, he said. You built ships from metal you barely understand, and weapons you cannot properly aim. Today we remind you of your place among the stars. Humanity's resistance ends here. Behind him, footage played of Ardent Hollow burning, of other colonies, smaller and less defended, falling in the same manner, of human ships breaking apart under fire they could not answer. I watched that broadcast from a medical bay on a refugee transport, my hands bandaged from pulling wreckage away from people who could not be saved, and I felt something inside me change. It was not fear. Fear had already come and gone, back on Ardent Hollow, back in that final moment when Grace disappeared from beside me. What remained after fear was something colder, something quieter, and something that would not leave me for years to come. "They think we are finished," said a voice beside me. It was Colonel Bennett, sitting with her arm in a sling, watching the same broadcast on a smaller screen. "Are we?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "No," she said, "but they need to believe that we are." I did not understand what she meant. Not fully. Not that day. I only understood the ache in my chest and the silence where my sister's voice used to be. Over the following weeks, the Thren Compact tightened its hold across the outer colonies. They did not chase down every scattered human transport. They did not need to. Word spread through the galaxy quickly, carried by trade ships and diplomatic channels between dozens of alien nations who had never bothered to learn our names before. Humanity, the newest and loudest voice among the stars, had been silenced within half a year of declaring it would not bow. Other species mocked us openly now. Broadcasts from distant systems replayed clips of our fallen ships as entertainment, as warning, as proof of their own superiority. I heard recordings of alien commentators laughing about human stubbornness, about our foolish belief that courage alone could win a war against technology centuries beyond our own. I carried that laughter with me every day, folded somewhere deep where it would not fade. Our surviving leadership, what remained of it, made a decision that shocked even those of us who trusted them. Humanity would go silent, not surrender, silent. Every remaining human vessel and outpost received the same order, delivered through encrypted channels that took days to reach the scattered edges of our broken empire. Withdraw from all visible space. Abandon every colony the Thren Compact had not yet reached. Vanish from every sensor and every star chart that mattered. To the rest of the galaxy, it would look like humanity had finally died out, crushed under Thren boots like so many species before us. I remember standing in the observation deck of the transport ship that carried the last of Ardent Hollow's survivors, watching stars slide past the window, when Colonel Bennett found me there. "You lost someone," she said. It was not a question. "My sister," I answered. "Grace." "I am sorry, Ethan." She said it plainly, without the softness people usually use for grief, and somehow that made it easier to hear. "I lost my brother 2 years before this war even started. Different reason. Still the same emptiness." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "There is a program starting," she continued. "Something quiet, something the Thren Compact will never see coming, because they believe we no longer exist to plan anything at all." "What kind of program?" She turned to look at me directly. "The kind that turns grief into something useful. If you want in, come find me once we reach the gathering point." I did not answer her right away. I spent that night thinking of Grace, of the way she used to hum songs while working at her terminal, of the ramp she never reached. By morning, my answer had already formed itself without my permission. We arrived, 3 weeks later, at a hidden gathering point deep within an asteroid field that Thren scanners had marked as empty and useless centuries before human ships ever found a use for it. Hundreds of vessels waited there already, survivors from a dozen different colonies, all carrying the same silence, the same buried anger. Colonel Bennett stood before us in a makeshift hangar, addressing rows of exhausted, grieving people who had lost homes, families, and futures within the span of half a year. "They believe we are finished," she said, her voice carrying across the metal walls. "They believe humanity ends today, in silence, forgotten among the stars. Let them believe it. Let the galaxy laugh at our loss, because every moment they spend laughing is a moment they are not watching us." I stood among strangers who had become something like family through shared devastation, and for the first time since Ardent Hollow, I felt something other than emptiness settle into my chest. It was not hope, not yet. It was resolve, sharp and cold, and it would carry humanity through years of silence that followed. The broadcast continued for a while after that, other species repeating the same mocking tone, treating humanity's disappearance as confirmation of our weakness. Slowly, over months, those broadcasts became less frequent. The galaxy moved on, as galaxies do, forgetting the newest species that had dared to resist and then vanished entirely from view. They did not know we were still out there, hidden in the dark between stars, rebuilding from nothing but wreckage and memory. I did not know it then, standing in that hangar with bandaged hands and a hollow place where my sister used to be. But the silence the galaxy mistook for our ending was only the beginning of something none of them were prepared to face. 6 years of silence change a person in ways that battle never could. I learned that slowly, in the depths of a hollowed-out asteroid we called Anchor Point, one of dozens of hidden shipyards humanity built after the fall of Ardent Hollow. My hands, once trained only for basic starship maintenance, grew calloused from years of work on engines, weapon systems, and hull plating salvaged from wreckage the Thren Compact left behind after their victories. We took their broken technology apart piece by piece, studying every circuit, every alloy, every strange and elegant solution their engineers had perfected over centuries we did not have. "They build for efficiency," said Oliver Grant, the lead engineer at Anchor Point, during one of our late-night sessions in the workshop. He held up a piece of salvaged plating, turning it under the dim light. "We build for adaptation. That is our advantage, Ethan. They design one perfect answer. We design 1,000 imperfect ones, and we keep the ones that work." I spent those early years learning everything Oliver could teach me about the technology we had captured, while also training under Colonel Bennett, who insisted every survivor at Anchor Point learn both engineering and combat readiness. There was no room, she said, for people who could only do one thing. The colony itself grew slowly, carved deeper into the asteroid with each passing season. What began as a scattered gathering of frightened survivors became something closer to a hidden nation. Families rebuilt lives in tunnels lit by salvaged lighting systems. Children were born who would never see open sky, growing up instead beneath stone ceilings, taught history lessons about a homeworld most of them would never visit. I often thought of Grace during those years, especially during quiet moments in the workshop when the hum of machinery reminded me of the sound she used to make while working. I kept a small piece of her uniform, torn during our escape from Ardent Hollow, tucked into a drawer beside my bunk. I never spoke of it to anyone, but I looked at it often, especially before difficult days. Colonel Bennett rose quickly through what remained of humanity's fractured command structure during those years, eventually taking charge of the entire rebuilding program across all our hidden colonies. She visited Anchor Point regularly, always arriving with new intelligence gathered from the few trade contacts we maintained with smaller, less prominent species who had no particular loyalty to the Thren Compact. "They still believe we are gone," she told a gathering of engineers and pilots during one such visit, roughly 3 years into our silence. "Their attention has moved to expanding their borders elsewhere. Some of their forces have grown careless, spread thin across too many systems." "How thin?" asked Lucas Bryant, one of our newer pilots, a young man who had lost his entire family during the early days of the war and had spent every year since training obsessively for a fight he was determined to survive. "Thin enough that patience will matter more than anger," Bennett answered, looking directly at him. "We do not move until we are ready. Every ship we build, every pilot we train, every system we improve brings that day closer. Rushing brings only failure." I understood her caution, even when the anger in my chest wanted otherwise. I had learned patience the hard way, through years of watching projects fail and succeed in equal measure, through mistakes that cost us materials and time we could barely afford to lose. Our first successful new warship design emerged during the 4th year of our silence. We called it the Halden class, named after Grace Halden, a young engineer who had died during an early testing accident and whose calculations had ultimately made the design possible. The Halden class combined the raw power of captured Thren weapon systems with human innovations in speed and maneuverability that our observers noted the Compact's own ships lacked. "Their ships are built like fortresses," Oliver explained during the unveiling of the first completed Halden vessel, standing proudly beside its dark hull inside our largest hangar. "Powerful, but slow to respond, slow to adapt mid-battle. Ours will move like something alive." I flew that first Halden-class ship during its earliest test flights, alongside Lucas Bryant and a handful of other pilots who had trained together for years in preparation for this exact moment. The controls responded with a fluidity that our older human designs never achieved, turning and adjusting almost as quickly as thought itself. "This is going to work," Lucas said over the comm during one test, genuine excitement breaking through his usually guarded tone. "Ethan, this is actually going to work." I allowed myself, for the first time in years, a small measure of something like hope. Training intensified after the Halden class proved successful. Colonel Bennett established simulated combat scenarios based on every piece of Thren tactical data we had gathered, forcing pilots and ground forces alike to practice against strategies mirroring the Compact's known methods. We studied their patterns obsessively, learning where their confidence made them predictable, where their reliance on superior technology made them slow to consider alternatives a species like humanity might use against them. "They fight like they have already won," Bennett told us during one strategy session, standing before a projected map of known Thren territory. "That confidence is a weakness we intend to use fully." I grew into a role I never imagined for myself during those years, eventually taking command of a strike wing consisting of 6 Halden-class ships, alongside Lucas Bryant as my second in command. We trained relentlessly, running mock engagements against increasingly difficult simulated opponents, refining tactics that emphasize speed, unpredictability, and coordinated strikes against vulnerable points rather than direct confrontation. Anchor Point was not the only hidden colony rebuilding during those years. Bennett's network eventually connected nearly 30 scattered human settlements across the dark spaces between stars, each contributing something different toward our shared preparation. Some focused on shipbuilding, others on training soldiers for ground engagements, still others on gathering intelligence through careful, quiet contact with smaller alien traders willing to share information in exchange for goods we could produce. I met Emma Whitfield during the 5th year of our silence, a communications specialist who had transferred to Anchor Point from a smaller outpost destroyed by internal system failure rather than enemy action. She worked closely with our intelligence-gathering efforts, translating and analyzing information brought back by our trade contacts. "The Compact has grown complacent," she told me during one late evening briefing, spreading data across the table between us. "Their forward outposts along contested border regions operate with minimal defensive coverage. They believe no one remains capable of challenging them there." "How confident are you in this information?" I asked. "Confident enough that Colonel Bennett has already begun drafting preliminary strike proposals," she answered. That conversation marked a turning point for all of us at Anchor Point. What had been years of quiet building and training began shifting toward active planning, toward the eventual day when silence would finally end. I remember the exact moment Colonel Bennett gathered our senior officers together, 6 years after Ardent Hollow, to share her final assessment before recommending humanity's return to visible conflict. "We are not ready to face them directly," she said, standing before a room filled with commanders, engineers, and pilots who had spent years preparing for this exact conversation. "But we are ready to make them notice us again, on our terms, in ways they will not expect." "What does that mean specifically?" asked Lucas, voicing the question everyone in the room wanted answered. "Strikes," Bennett said simply. "Precise, coordinated, and impossible to trace back to any single location. We remind the Thren Compact that humanity still exists, while giving them nothing solid to retaliate against." I felt the weight of those words settle over the room. Years of grief, of quiet building, of training against imagined enemies were about to become something real again. "When do we begin?" I asked. Bennett looked at each of us in turn before answering. "Soon," she said. "But first, every strike wing across every hidden colony needs absolute confidence in their training, their ships, and their commanders. I will not send anyone forward who is not ready." Preparation continued for several more months after that meeting, refining final details, running last simulations, ensuring every possible weakness had been addressed as thoroughly as our limited resources allowed. I spent long nights reviewing tactical data alongside Emma, who had become someone I trusted deeply during those years, both as a colleague and, slowly, as something more personal that neither of us spoke about directly amid the pressures surrounding us. "Are you afraid?" she asked me one evening, during a rare quiet moment away from briefings and preparations. "Every day," I admitted, "but not the way I was afraid at Ardent Hollow. This is different. This fear has purpose behind it." She studied me for a long moment before responding. "Grace would be proud of what you have become, Ethan." I did not answer immediately, feeling the familiar ache that accompanied any mention of my sister, even after so many years. "I hope so," I finally said. "I hope this is worth what we lost to get here." The final briefing came without warning, called suddenly by Colonel Bennett after months of preparation reached their natural conclusion. Every strike wing across every hidden human colony received the same coordinated orders simultaneously, timed with precision that had taken years of careful planning to achieve. "Today," Bennett said, addressing gathered commanders through secure channels connecting dozens of hidden colonies simultaneously, "humanity ends its silence." I stood before my own strike wing at Anchor Point, looking at faces I had trained alongside for years, people who had lost as much as I had, who carried their own private griefs into this moment the same way I carried mine. "They believe we no longer exist," I told them, echoing sentiments Bennett had shared years earlier in that first gathering after Ardent Hollow's fall. "Today, we remind them otherwise." Lucas stepped forward, meeting my eyes with the same quiet determination he had carried since our earliest training days together. "For everyone we lost," he said simply. "For everyone we lost," the wing repeated, voices steady despite the weight behind those words. We boarded our ships that evening, 6 Halden-class vessels prepared for humanity's first coordinated action in 6 years of careful, patient silence. I settled into my pilot's seat, feeling the familiar hum of engines built from lessons learned through loss, anger, and years of relentless preparation. Behind me, Anchor Point's hidden hangar doors opened toward open space for the first time in years, revealing stars that had watched humanity disappear into silence, unaware they were about to witness something the galaxy had long since stopped expecting from us. I gripped the controls, steadying my breathing as final coordinates loaded into my navigation system, targeting a forward Thren outpost along contested border territory that Emma's intelligence had identified as vulnerable, undefended, and completely unprepared for what was coming. "All wings, report status." Bennett's voice came through the calm despite the significance of the moment. One by one, commanders across dozens of hidden colonies confirmed readiness, voices steady across channels that had remained silent for 6 long years. "Anchor Point wing, ready," I said, my own voice carrying more confidence than I had expected to feel. "Then let us remind them," Bennett said, "that mocking humanity's loss was always going to be their greatest mistake." Engines fired across 30 hidden colonies simultaneously, humanity's first united movement in 6 years of patient, silent preparation, launching toward a galaxy that believed our story had already ended. The Thren outpost appeared on our sensors exactly where Emma's intelligence said it would be, a cluster of defensive platforms surrounding a supply depot that fed several forward bases along the contested border. My hands remained steady on the controls despite the pounding in my chest. "Formation Delta," I called over the comm, watching my 5 wingmates spread into the pattern we had rehearsed hundreds of times in simulation. "Lucas, take the western platforms. I will handle the depot directly." "Copy that," Lucas answered, his voice calm in a way that told me his training had finally overcome whatever fear remained underneath. We dropped out of concealment at close range, a tactic the Halden class made possible through improved stealth systems Oliver's team had spent years perfecting. The Thren defenders barely had time to register our presence before our first coordinated strike disabled their outer sensor array, blinding their ability to call for reinforcement. I had expected fear during this moment, the same paralyzing terror I felt watching Grace disappear years before. Instead, I found focus, sharp and clear, every instinct trained through years of preparation guiding my hands across the controls without hesitation. "Zippo shields weakening," I reported, watching readouts shift as our combined fire pressed against their defenses. 30 seconds to breach. The Thren response, when it finally came, revealed exactly the weakness Bennett had predicted for years. Their pilots, trained for centuries against opponents who fought with predictable, direct confrontation, struggled against our deliberately unpredictable maneuvering. Where their tactics relied on overwhelming force delivered in straight, calculated strikes, ours emphasized constant repositioning, striking from angles their targeting systems had not been designed to anticipate quickly enough. "Depot shields down," I called out, watching the readout confirm our breach. "Disabling supply systems now." We did not destroy the outpost entirely. Bennett's orders had been explicit on this point during final briefings. Our goal was disruption, not devastation. We disabled critical supply and communication systems, ensuring the outpost could no longer support forward Thren operations along that border region, while leaving enough intact that compact forces would need to divert significant resources toward repair and reinforcement. "All targets disabled," Lucas reported from his position among the western platforms. "No pursuit forces detected." "Then we are finished here," I said, already plotting our withdrawal course. "Formation Delta, return to concealment." We disappeared back into the dark spaces between stars before any significant Thren response force could arrive, leaving behind confusion and disrupted supply lines that would take weeks to properly assess and repair. That first strike was only one of dozens occurring simultaneously across the border region that same evening. Reports filtered back to Anchor Point over the following days, painting a picture of coordinated disruption spreading across territory the Thren Compact had considered completely secure. 6 outposts disabled, Emma reported during our first debriefing after the strikes concluded. 3 supply convoys intercepted and redirected before reaching their destinations. No confirmed losses among any human strike wing. Colonel Bennett studied the reports carefully, her expression revealing little of what she felt, though I noticed something in her posture that suggested years of tension finally beginning to ease, if only slightly. "This is only the beginning," she told the gathered commanders during that same debriefing. "The Compact will investigate, certainly, but their initial response will likely dismiss these strikes as isolated incidents, perhaps attributed to rebellious factions among their own smaller allied species. It will take time before they consider the possibility that humanity has returned." That assessment proved accurate during the weeks that followed. We continued conducting carefully spaced strikes across different border regions, never repeating patterns, never allowing our tactics to become predictable in the way the Compact's own methods had proven vulnerable to exploitation. Emma's intelligence network expanded during this period, gathering increasingly detailed information about Thren confusion regarding the source of these disruptions. "They are blaming each other," she reported during one particularly satisfying briefing, roughly 2 months after our first coordinated strikes began. "Their internal communications suggest growing suspicion between different regional commanders, each accusing the others of incompetence or hidden rebellion." I found myself smiling at that news, a genuine expression of satisfaction I had not felt in years. "Let them keep guessing," I said. Lucas, seated beside me during the briefing, shared a similar sentiment. "Every day they spend confused is another day we spend growing stronger." Our strike wing conducted 17 separate operations over the following 4 months, each one carefully planned to maximize disruption while minimizing risk to our own forces. We grew more confident with each success, refining our tactics further, learning to anticipate Thren defensive adjustments almost before their own commanders fully understood what adjustments were needed. During one such operation, targeting a supply convoy moving through a particularly remote section of contested space, we encountered something unexpected. Rather than the typical lightly defended transport ships we had grown accustomed to intercepting, this convoy included escort vessels clearly designed for actual combat readiness. "They are learning," Lucas observed as we approached, watching sensor readings reveal the unexpected defensive capability. Someone finally convinced their command structure to take these disruptions seriously. Then we adjust accordingly, I said, already recalculating our approach based on this new information. Formation Echo. Focus fire on the lead escort vessel. If we disable their command ship quickly, the remaining escorts may struggle to coordinate effectively. The engagement that followed proved more challenging than previous operations, testing our tactics against opponents actually prepared for unconventional attack patterns. Still, years of training paid dividends during those tense moments, our coordinated maneuvering allowing us to disable the lead escort vessel before its companions could establish effective defensive positioning. Convoy disabled, I reported once the engagement concluded, checking sensor readings to confirm no significant damage among our own wing. All ships accounted for, minor damage only. They will keep adapting, Emma warned, during our debriefing following that operation. Each engagement teaches them something new about our capabilities, just as each engagement teaches us more about theirs. Colonel Bennett acknowledged this reality during a larger strategic briefing shortly afterward, gathering commanders from across our network of hidden colonies to discuss adjustments necessary as Thren defensive capabilities continued improving in response to our sustained pressure. We always knew this moment would come, she said, addressing concerns several commanders raised regarding increasing Thren readiness. Our advantage was never going to remain purely tactical forever. Eventually, they will match our unpredictability with their own adjustments. What matters now is whether our foundation, 6 years of careful preparation, proves strong enough to maintain our advantage even as they adapt. I found myself thinking often during this period about how far humanity had traveled since those desperate early days following Ardent Hollow's fall. We had transformed from scattered survivors mourning devastating losses into a coordinated, disciplined force capable of conducting sustained operations against an enemy that once considered us entirely finished. Word eventually reached other species across the galaxy regarding the mysterious disruptions occurring along Thren compact border territory. Emma's intelligence network confirmed growing speculation among smaller, independent trading species, some of whom had witnessed first-hand evidence of human survival during brief encounters with our strike wings operating in contested regions. Rumors are spreading, she reported during a briefing roughly 6 months after our operations began. Some traders speak of encountering human ships, though most dismiss these accounts as impossible, given how thoroughly the compact claimed to have eliminated our species years ago. Let the rumors spread, Bennett said. Confusion serves us well during this stage. The moment we reveal ourselves fully, we need every advantage available, including whatever uncertainty currently exists regarding our true capabilities. I understood her reasoning, even as part of me grew impatient for the day we would finally confront the Thren compact directly, rather than continuing these smaller, scattered operations. That impatience, I recognized, mirrored feelings I had carried since watching that first mocking broadcast years earlier, feelings that had matured over time from raw anger into something more disciplined, more purposeful. During a quiet evening at Anchor Point, following another successful operation, Emma found me reviewing tactical data alone in the workshop, where Oliver's team continued refining our ship designs, based on lessons learned through continued engagement. "You have changed since I first arrived here," she said, settling into a seat across from me. "Everyone has changed," I answered. "This war changed all of us." "That is true," she agreed. "But you specifically, Ethan. There is something different in how you carry yourself now, compared to those early days after Ardent Hollow." I considered her observation carefully before responding. "I used to think this was only about revenge," I admitted, "about making them pay for what they took from us. Somewhere during these past years, it became something more than that." "What did it become?" "Proving that we deserve to exist," I said. "Not just surviving, but showing that humanity has something worth respecting, worth considering as equals rather than something to mock and dismiss." Emma studied me quietly for a long moment before responding. "Grace would be proud of that answer," she said softly. I felt the familiar ache accompanying any mention of my sister, though it had grown gentler over the years, transformed from raw grief into something closer to quiet motivation. "I hope so," I said. "I hope all of this eventually proves worth what it cost us to get here." Our sustained operations continued for several more months, gradually escalating in scale and ambition as our confidence and capabilities grew alongside the disruption we caused across Thren border territory. Eventually, Colonel Bennett called together commanders from every hidden human colony for what she described as our most significant strategic briefing since humanity's silence first began. "Our scattered operations have accomplished exactly what we needed them to accomplish," she said, addressing the gathered commanders through secure channels connecting our entire hidden network. "The Thren Compact now understands that humanity survives, though they remain uncertain regarding our true numbers, our true capabilities, and, most importantly, our true intentions." "What comes next?" I asked, voicing the question every commander present clearly wanted answered. Bennett's expression grew serious as she prepared her response. "What comes next," she said, "determines whether humanity remains a persistent irritation along their borders or becomes something the Thren Compact can no longer afford to underestimate." I felt the weight of her words settle across the gathered commanders, understanding intuitively that whatever came next would prove far more significant than anything we had accomplished during these months of careful, sustained disruption. "Gather your wings," Bennett continued. "Prepare every ship, every pilot, every resource our network has spent years developing. The time has come for humanity to stop hiding entirely, and instead force a confrontation the Thren Compact cannot ignore or dismiss." I looked around at the faces of commanders who had spent years alongside me rebuilding from devastating loss, transforming grief into purpose, patience into readiness. Whatever awaited us during the confrontation Bennett was describing, I understood we approached it as something far different from the desperate, scattered survivors who had fled Ardent Hollow 6 years earlier. We had become something the galaxy no longer expected humanity capable of becoming, and soon the Thren Compact would finally understand exactly what that transformation meant for the war they believed they had already won. The system was called Kestrel's Reach, though few outside our command structure remembered why that name mattered so deeply to every human commander gathered for this operation. It was here, in this exact star system, that the Thren Compact had broadcast their mocking declaration of victory 6 years earlier, the same broadcast I had watched from a medical bay while grieving my sister's loss. Colonel Bennett chose this location deliberately for what would become humanity's most significant engagement since the war's earliest devastating months. Emma's intelligence network had confirmed that Kestrel's Reach now served as a major Thren Compact command center, overseeing their border operations and coordinating response efforts against our sustained disruption campaign. "They believe this location remains beyond our reach," Bennett explained during our final briefing before the operation began, standing before assembled commanders representing every hidden human colony across our scattered network. "That confidence makes it the perfect location to demonstrate exactly how wrong they remain about humanity's true capabilities." I stood among nearly 40 ship commanders that day, representing combined forces our colonies had spent 6 years carefully constructing. Beside me, Lucas Bryant studied tactical displays showing Kestrel's Reach's defensive arrangements, while Emma coordinated final intelligence updates from her position monitoring communication channels across the region. "Their defensive fleet includes at least 60 vessels," Emma reported, updating figures as final reconnaissance data arrived. "Command estimates suggest significant reinforcements could arrive within hours if they successfully signal for support." "Then we ensure they cannot signal effectively," Bennett said, already anticipating this challenge. "Communications disruption becomes our first priority, alongside neutralizing their most significant defensive assets before reinforcements become relevant." Our combined fleet included nearly 120 vessels gathered from across every hidden colony, ranging from Halden-class strike ships, like those I commanded, to larger support vessels Oliver's teams had developed during recent months, specifically for sustained engagement rather than quick disruption strikes. I felt something different settling over me as final preparations concluded, a mixture of the familiar resolve I had carried since Ardent Hollow alongside something new, something that felt remarkably close to genuine confidence rather than desperate determination. "This is what 6 years of preparation has led toward," Bennett said, addressing the gathered commanders one final time before our fleet departed toward Kestrel's Reach. "Every ship built, every pilot trained, every sacrifice made across our hidden colonies exists because of this moment. We do not fight today for revenge alone. We fight to prove that humanity deserves recognition as something more than a footnote in another species' history." We departed Anchor Point that evening, joining combined forces from across our network at a predetermined rally point before beginning our final approach toward Kestrel's Reach. I settled into my familiar pilot's seat, watching Lucas and our expanded strike wing form alongside dozens of other human vessels, more ships gathered together in one location than I had witnessed since before Ardent Hollow's fall. "Formation holding steady," Lucas reported as we approached the system's outer boundary. "No indication they have detected our approach yet." Our combined stealth capabilities, refined through years of careful development, allowed our substantial fleet to approach Kestrel's Reach without triggering Thren compact detection systems until we had positioned ourselves precisely where Bennett's tactical planning required. "All wings, prepare for coordinated strike." Bennett's voice came through the comm, steady despite the significance of the moment approaching. "Communications disruption teams, begin your operation now." Specialized ships within our fleet, designed specifically for this purpose, activated systems intended to disrupt Thren communication arrays throughout the system, preventing effective coordination between their defensive forces and blocking any attempt to signal for reinforcement. "Communications disrupted," came confirmation moments later. "Their forces are operating blind." "Then we begin," Bennett said. "All strike wings, engage designated targets immediately." What followed became the largest engagement humanity had conducted since our earliest devastating defeats 6 years before. Our fleet moved with coordinated precision developed through years of shared training, striking simultaneously against Thren defensive positions throughout Kestrel's Reach, while their forces struggled against disrupted communications that prevented effective coordination. I led my strike wing directly toward the system's primary command station, the same location from which the Thren Compact had broadcast their mocking declaration years earlier. Defensive vessels surrounding the station responded quickly despite communication difficulties, their pilots clearly skilled despite lacking centralized coordination. "Incoming fire, evasive pattern 7, I called out, guiding my ship through maneuvers our years of training had made almost instinctive. Behind me, Lucas and our remaining wingmates matched the pattern precisely, presenting Thren targeting systems with exactly the unpredictable movement that had proven so effective throughout our previous operations. "Command station shields weakening," I reported as our combined fire pressed steadily against their defenses. Continuing approach. The battle around us grew increasingly intense as Thren defensive forces, despite communication difficulties, began adapting their tactics in ways that suggested individual commanders finally recognizing the unconventional nature of our attack patterns. Ships that had initially struggled against our maneuvering began anticipating certain movements, forcing us to continuously adjust our own approach. "They are learning quickly," Lucas observed during a brief pause between engagement waves. "Faster than previous encounters suggested they could. Then we adapt faster than they can learn," I answered, already recalculating approach vectors based on their improving responses. Elsewhere throughout the system, other human strike wings engaged different Thren defensive positions, each contributing toward Bennett's overall strategic goal of overwhelming Kestrel's Reach's defenses before reinforcements could arrive despite our communications disruption efforts. Reports filtered through secure channels, painting a picture of gradual but steady progress across multiple engagement points. "Outer defensive ring collapsed," came one report, "moving toward secondary positions now. Support vessels successfully disabling their repair and resupply capabilities," came another. Their ability to sustain prolonged engagement continues weakening. I felt something building within our combined forces as the engagement progressed, a growing confidence that had been absent during our earlier, more desperate encounters with Thren compact forces years before. We were not merely surviving this engagement. We were actively winning it, systematically dismantling defenses that had once seemed impossibly beyond our capability to challenge. The command station's shields finally collapsed after nearly an hour of sustained engagement, revealing vulnerable systems beneath that our combined firepower could finally reach directly. I guided my ship through the resulting opening, watching sensor readings confirm successful penetration of their primary defensive perimeter. "Command station exposed," I reported, beginning final approach toward their central command structure. It was during this final approach that Thren compact reinforcements finally began arriving, having apparently established alternative communication methods our disruption efforts had not fully anticipated. New vessels appeared at the system's edge, considerably more numerous than our earlier intelligence had suggested possible within this time frame. Reinforcements arriving. Emma's voice cut through the calm, tension evident despite her efforts to maintain composure. Estimated 40 additional vessels, approaching from multiple vectors. I felt my chest tighten at this news, understanding immediately the significant challenge these reinforcements represented to our already stretched combined forces. Colonel Bennett's voice came through moments later, steady despite the concerning development. "All wings, maintain current engagement," she ordered. "Reserve forces, prepare to intercept incoming reinforcements at designated interception points." I had not known, until this exact moment, that Bennett's careful planning had anticipated precisely this possibility, holding additional forces in reserve specifically to address potential reinforcement scenarios that might develop during our primary engagement. "Reserve forces engaging," came confirmation shortly afterward, followed by reports indicating our reserve fleet successfully intercepting Thren reinforcements before they could reach the main engagement zone surrounding the command station. This development provided our primary strike forces the additional time necessary to complete our objective. I guided my ship through the final approach toward Kestrel's Reach's central command structure, watching as combined fire from my wing and several supporting vessels finally breached the station's inner defenses entirely. "Central command structure exposed," I reported, feeling the significance of this moment settling over me. Awaiting further instructions. Colonel Bennett's response came moments later, her voice carrying something I had not heard from her since before Ardent Hollow's fall, something that sounded remarkably close to genuine satisfaction. "Disable their command capability entirely," she ordered. "Do not destroy the station completely. We want them to understand exactly what happened here today, and exactly who accomplished it." I understood her reasoning immediately, recognizing the strategic value in leaving Thren compact leadership alive to witness first-hand evidence of humanity's transformation from the broken, scattered survivors they had mocked 6 years earlier into a force capable of directly challenging their previously unquestioned dominance. We disabled the command station's critical systems methodically, ensuring their capability for coordinated response throughout the region remained crippled without eliminating the structure entirely. Throughout the system, similar reports arrived from other engagement points, confirming successful disruption of Thren compact defensive and command capabilities across Kestrel's Reach. "Engagement objectives achieved," Bennett announced finally, addressing our combined fleet across secure channels. "All wings, prepare for withdrawal. We have accomplished exactly what this operation required." As we withdrew from Kestrel's Reach, leaving behind a system that Thren compact leadership had once considered the symbolic center of their victory over humanity, I felt something shift within me that had remained absent since watching Grace disappear 6 years earlier. It was not closure, not entirely, because grief like that never truly disappears completely, but it was something adjacent to peace, a recognition that whatever came next in this ongoing conflict, humanity had proven something today that no amount of mockery or dismissal could erase from galactic memory. "They will not underestimate us again," Lucas said quietly over our private comm channel as we guided our ships back toward concealment, away from the system where humanity's supposed ending had once been so confidently declared. No, I agreed, watching Kestrel's reach fade behind us on our sensor displays. They will not. What none of us fully anticipated, during that moment of quiet victory following our successful engagement, was exactly how quickly word would spread throughout the Thren compact leadership structure regarding what had occurred at Kestrel's reach, and exactly what response that news would eventually provoke from a species that had spent 6 years believing humanity no longer existed as any meaningful threat to their continued expansion across the galaxy. 3 weeks after Kestrel's reach, a small, unmarked vessel approached Anchor Point's outer defensive perimeter, broadcasting an emergency signal requesting parley rather than triggering any hostile engagement protocol. Colonel Bennett received the request personally, studying the vessel's configuration carefully before authorizing its approach. "It carries Thren compact diplomatic markings," Emma reported, analyzing sensor data as the vessel drew closer under careful watch from our defensive forces. "Their transponder identifies it as an official envoy vessel, requesting direct communication with human leadership." I stood beside Bennett in Anchor Point's primary command center, watching the small ship approach through heavily monitored sensor feeds. 6 years of silence, followed by months of escalating engagement, culminating in Kestrel's reach, had led toward this exact moment, one none of us had fully anticipated occurring so quickly following our demonstration of renewed capability. "Allow their approach," Bennett said finally, though caution remained evident in her tone. "Maintain full defensive readiness throughout their visit." The vessel docked within Anchor Point's outer hangar under careful supervision from armed security personnel positioned throughout the surrounding area. A single Thren representative emerged, tall and pale as their species typically appeared, dressed in formal diplomatic attire rather than the ceremonial military garments I remembered from that mocking broadcast years earlier. "I am High Envoy Val Corun," the representative announced through a translation device, his voice carrying careful neutrality that revealed nothing of whatever emotions lay beneath his formal presentation. "I speak on behalf of the Thren Compact Leadership Council, requesting direct communication regarding recent developments along our shared border regions." Bennett studied him carefully before responding, her expression revealing nothing of whatever thoughts occupied her mind during this unprecedented meeting. "Colonel Laura Bennett," she said simply, "speak your purpose, Envoy Corran." Corran hesitated slightly before continuing, a hesitation that struck me as significant given the confident, dismissive tone I remembered from Thren communications years before. "The Compact Leadership Council acknowledges that our previous assessment regarding humanity's status was significantly mistaken," he said. "Recent engagements have demonstrated capabilities we did not believe your species retained following our earlier conflict." "You mean Kestrel's reach," Bennett said, her tone remaining carefully neutral despite the significance behind her words. "Among other engagements, yes," Corran confirmed. "The Council recognizes that humanity has developed capabilities exceeding our previous assessments considerably. This recognition prompts my presence here today, seeking clarity regarding humanity's intentions moving forward." I watched this exchange carefully, feeling something complicated settling within my chest as I listened to a Thren representative speaking with careful respect toward humanity, a stark contrast against memories of mocking broadcasts and dismissive declarations I had carried since Ardent Hollow's fall. "Our intentions," Bennett said, "depend considerably upon what the Compact Leadership Council believes should happen next, given recent developments." Corran's response revealed genuine uncertainty, a quality I had never witnessed from Thren leadership during our earlier encounters with their species. "The Council remains divided," he admitted. "Some among our leadership advocate renewed military engagement, believing recent human successes represent isolated circumstances unlikely to sustain against coordinated response. Others believe continued conflict serves no beneficial purpose for either species." "And your own assessment, Envoy Corran?" Bennett asked directly. He considered his response carefully before answering. "I believe continued conflict risks significant losses for both species, with uncertain outcomes given what we witnessed at Kestrel's reach. I was sent here specifically to assess whether humanity might consider discussing alternative arrangements, rather than pursuing further military engagement. Bennett exchanged a brief glance with me before responding, though I understood immediately that whatever decision emerged from this unprecedented diplomatic contact would extend far beyond anything either of us could determine alone. "This decision extends beyond my authority alone," Bennett said finally. "I will need to consult with broader human leadership before providing any formal response regarding potential arrangements between our species." "I understand," Corrin replied. "The Council awaits your response, whatever direction it ultimately takes." Following Corrin's departure, Bennett called together representatives from across our entire hidden network, gathering commanders and leaders from every human colony that had contributed toward our years of careful preparation and recent military successes. The discussion that followed extended across several days, addressing considerations far more complex than any single military engagement we had previously conducted. "We could press our advantage further," argued Commander Sophie Lang, representing one of our larger hidden colonies, during one particularly heated discussion. "Kestrel's reach proved we possess capabilities they did not anticipate. Continued pressure might force considerably more favorable terms than simple parley discussions." "At what cost?" countered Oliver Grant, whose engineering perspective offered practical considerations regarding our actual sustained capability for prolonged conflict. "Our resources remain considerably limited compared to their broader capacity. Continued engagement risks exhausting advantages we spent 6 years carefully developing." I listened to these discussions carefully, understanding both perspectives while grappling with my own complicated feelings regarding what justice actually meant following everything humanity had endured since Ardent Hollow's fall. Part of me, the part still carrying memories of Grace disappearing before that final ramp, wanted nothing more than continued pressure against a species that had mocked our suffering so thoroughly. Yet another part of me, the part that had grown through years of careful rebuilding alongside people who had lost as much as I had, recognized something Bennett had emphasized repeatedly throughout our preparation years, that humanity's ultimate goal extended beyond simple revenge toward proving ourselves worthy of genuine respect among the galaxy's established civilizations. "What does Ethan think?" Bennett asked directly during one discussion, turning attention toward me despite my relatively junior position compared to other assembled commanders. I considered my response carefully before speaking. "I lost my sister at Ardent Hollow," I said. "Every day since, I have carried that loss alongside anger toward everything the Thren Compact represented in that moment. But these past 6 years taught me something important about what actually matters beyond simple retribution." "What matters?" Sophie asked. "Proving that we deserve better than what they gave us," I answered, "not through destruction, but through demonstrating that humanity possesses both strength and wisdom sufficient to determine our own path forward, rather than allowing anger alone to guide decisions affecting our species' future." Bennett studied me carefully following this response, something like quiet approval evident in her expression despite the gravity surrounding our discussion. "That perspective aligns considerably with what I believe humanity's response should ultimately become," she said. The discussions continued for several more days, addressing practical considerations regarding potential arrangements with the Thren Compact, weighing continued military advantage against genuine possibilities for lasting resolution that might prevent further losses across both species. Eventually, consensus emerged among the assembled leadership, though not without considerable debate regarding specific terms humanity should propose during formal negotiations. Bennett requested renewed contact with Envoy Corrin approximately 2 weeks following his initial visit, proposing formal negotiations between human leadership and Thren Compact representatives at a neutral location acceptable to both parties. Corrin's response arrived promptly, confirming Compact leadership's agreement to proceed with formal discussions. The negotiations themselves occurred aboard a neutral vessel positioned between human and Thren territory, attended by representatives from both species including myself, given my direct involvement in operations that had ultimately prompted this unprecedented diplomatic contact. Colonel Bennett led human representation, while a delegation including Envoy Karoon and several higher-ranking Compact officials represented their leadership council. The Compact acknowledges significant miscalculation regarding humanity's capabilities and resilience, announced Regent Sale Thurin, the senior Thren representative attending these formal discussions. During opening statements addressing the assembled delegates, we propose immediate cessation of hostile actions between our species, alongside establishment of formal diplomatic recognition acknowledging humanity's sovereign status among galactic civilizations. I watched Bennett's expression carefully as she considered this proposal, recognizing the significance behind Compact leadership offering formal recognition toward a species they had once dismissed so thoroughly during that mocking broadcast years earlier. Humanity accepts cessation of hostile actions, Bennett responded, contingent upon several additional conditions our leadership considers essential, given circumstances leading toward this current discussion. What conditions? Thurin asked, genuine curiosity evident despite formal diplomatic composure. Full accounting and acknowledgement regarding colonies destroyed during initial conflict, Bennett said, alongside appropriate compensation toward affected populations and formal commitment preventing future aggressive action against human territory or interests moving forward. Thurin considered this proposal carefully before responding. These conditions seem reasonable given circumstances, he said finally. The Council authorized considerable flexibility regarding terms necessary to establish lasting resolution between our species. I felt something significant settling within me as these negotiations progressed, watching representatives who had once mocked humanity's supposed ending now engaging seriously with terms designed to acknowledge genuine wrongs committed against colonies like Ardent Hollow, against people like Grace who had never received any opportunity to witness humanity's eventual transformation. Negotiations continued across several sessions, addressing detailed terms regarding territorial boundaries, trade arrangements, and formal diplomatic recognition that would establish humanity's position among galactic civilizations moving forward. Throughout these discussions, I observed something remarkable occurring gradually among Thren representatives, a shift from the confident dismissiveness I remembered from years earlier towards something closer to genuine respect, even something approaching apprehension regarding humanity's demonstrated capabilities. During a break between formal sessions, Envoy Karoon approached me directly, something I had not anticipated given the relatively junior position I held compared to other human representatives attending these negotiations. You commanded forces during the Kestrel's Reach engagement, he said, more statement than question. I did, I confirmed. May I ask what motivated your participation in these conflicts? He asked, genuine curiosity evident in his tone. Your species faced circumstances that our historical records suggest should have resulted in complete capitulation, yet you chose continued resistance instead. I considered his question carefully before responding. I lost my sister during the initial conflict, I said. For years afterward, I believed my motivation centered entirely around avenging that loss. Eventually, I learned that true motivation extended beyond simple revenge toward something more meaningful. Proving that humanity possesses value worth recognizing, I answered, not through destruction or dominance, but through demonstrating resilience, adaptability, and ultimately, wisdom sufficient to pursue genuine resolution rather than endless conflict. Corin studied me for a long moment before responding. That perspective differs considerably from assumptions our leadership held regarding human motivations, he said. Perhaps this negotiation represents opportunity for genuine understanding between our species, rather than simple cessation of hostile action alone. I found myself nodding in agreement, recognizing something valuable within his observation that extended beyond the formal terms currently under discussion between our respective leadership delegations. The negotiations concluded successfully after nearly 2 weeks of careful discussion, establishing formal terms that acknowledged wrongs committed during initial conflict while establishing pathways toward genuine diplomatic recognition and future cooperation between humanity and the Thren Compact. As these negotiations reached their conclusion, I understood that whatever came next for humanity would look considerably different from everything our species had experienced since that initial devastating conflict began. The formal treaty signing occurred 6 months following our successful negotiations, held at a newly established neutral station positioned between human and Thren territory, symbolically representing the bridge our two species had constructed following years of devastating conflict and painful loss. I stood among human representatives attending this historic ceremony, watching Colonel Bennett, now formally recognized as humanity's senior diplomatic representative, exchange formal signatures alongside Regent Thurin, finalizing terms that would guide relations between our species moving forward. 6 years ago, Bennett said during her formal address following the treaty signing, addressing assembled representatives from both human and Thren delegations alongside observers from several other galactic species who had traveled considerable distances to witness this unprecedented ceremony. Our species faced what many believed represented humanity's ending. Today we stand as proof that resilience, patience, and genuine commitment toward justice, rather than simple revenge, can transform even the most devastating circumstances into pathways toward lasting resolution. I felt considerable emotion during her address, memories of ardent hollow, of grace disappearing before that final ramp, of years spent rebuilding alongside people who had lost everything yet somehow found strength to continue forward despite overwhelming grief. Those memories, painful as they remained, had ultimately led toward this exact moment, toward genuine recognition humanity had fought so desperately to achieve. Following formal ceremonies, I found myself engaged in conversation with Envoy Karun, who had become something approaching genuine friendship during months of continued diplomatic contact following our initial negotiations. "How does it feel," he asked, "witnessing this resolution after everything your species endured?" I considered his question carefully before responding. "Complicated," I admitted. "Grateful that future generations might avoid experiencing what my generation endured, yet unable to forget everyone we lost along the way toward reaching this moment." "That complexity seems appropriate," Corrin observed, "given circumstances that led toward today's ceremony." I nodded in agreement, watching representatives from both species mingling throughout the station, engaging in conversations that would have seemed impossible given circumstances existing just years earlier when mocking broadcasts celebrated humanity's supposed ending rather than anticipating genuine cooperation eventually emerging between our species. Emma found me during a quiet moment away from formal proceedings, her expression carrying complicated emotions similar to those I continued experiencing throughout this historic day. "Grace would have wanted this," she said quietly, understanding intuitively where my thoughts had drifted during this significant occasion. "I believe so," I answered. "She always believed humanity deserved better than simple survival. She wanted us to become something worth genuine respect, rather than merely enduring circumstances forced upon us." "You helped make that belief reality," Emma said. I considered her words carefully, recognizing truth within them, despite lingering grief that remained regarding everything lost during years of devastating conflict. "We all did," I said finally. "Every person who contributed toward rebuilding, every sacrifice made across our hidden colonies, every decision to choose patience and wisdom over simple revenge, all of it led toward this exact moment. Following the treaty signing, humanity's status among galactic civilizations transformed considerably during subsequent years. Formal diplomatic relationships established with the Thren Compact gradually extended toward other species who had once dismissed humanity entirely, recognizing instead a civilization that had endured devastating loss yet emerged, demonstrating both remarkable resilience and genuine wisdom regarding how ultimately to resolve seemingly impossible circumstances. Colonel Bennett continued serving as humanity's senior diplomatic representative for several years following the treaty signing, eventually establishing formal training programs preparing future generations of human diplomats and military leadership for whatever challenges might eventually emerge as our species continued integrating more fully into broader galactic civilization. I eventually transitioned from military command toward diplomatic service myself, working alongside Envoy Karun and other Thren representatives on various cooperative projects designed to strengthen relationships between our respective species while addressing lingering concerns that remained following years of devastating conflict. Anchor Point, our hidden asteroid colony that had sheltered humanity's rebuilding efforts throughout those difficult silent years, eventually transformed into something considerably different from its original secretive purpose. Rather than remaining hidden, it became instead a monument, preserved carefully to remind future generations exactly what circumstances humanity had overcome during our species' most difficult period. I visited Ardent Hollow once more, several years following the treaty signing, joining a formal delegation traveling to establish memorial recognition honoring everyone lost during that colony's devastating fall. Standing among wreckage that remained from that terrible day, I found myself thinking extensively about Grace, about the ramp she never reached, about 6 years of grief that had ultimately transformed into purposeful determination, shaping everything humanity eventually became. She would be proud, Colonel Bennett said quietly, joining me during this difficult but necessary visit to the place where our shared journey toward eventual resolution had originally begun. I hope so, I answered, watching memorial construction proceeding carefully around the exact location where transport ramps had once stood before everything changed so completely and so suddenly. The memorial, once completed, included names of every person lost during Ardent Hollow's fall, alongside formal acknowledgement from Thren Compact leadership recognizing wrongs committed during that devastating engagement. I found Grace's name carefully inscribed among thousands of others, a permanent recognition ensuring her sacrifice, alongside everyone else lost that terrible day, would never fade from memory regardless of however many years passed following humanity's eventual transformation. Years later, I received invitation to address a gathering of young human diplomats and military officers, individuals born during or after our silent rebuilding years, who had grown up knowing humanity's eventual success rather than experiencing firsthand the devastating uncertainty that had characterized those difficult early years following Ardent Hollow's fall. "You inherited something remarkable," I told these gathered young people during my address, standing before representatives of a generation who would carry humanity's continued relationship with galactic civilization forward into whatever future awaited our species. Humanity once faced circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome, mockery and dismissal from species who believed us finished entirely following devastating initial losses. I paused, considering carefully how best to convey lessons learned throughout those difficult years, toward young people who had never experienced anything remotely similar to what my generation endured. What ultimately mattered, I continued, was not simply surviving those devastating circumstances, but choosing how we responded to overwhelming loss and mockery. We could have pursued simple revenge, allowing anger alone to guide our eventual response toward those who wronged us so completely. Instead, we chose patience, wisdom, and ultimately, genuine commitment toward justice rather than destruction. A young officer raised her hand during the question period following my address, asking something that struck me as particularly significant given everything humanity had experienced throughout those transformative years. "Do you regret choosing negotiation over continued military advantage?" she asked, given that humanity possessed considerable strength following operations like Kestrel's Reach. I considered her question carefully before responding, recognizing its significance extending far beyond simple historical curiosity toward genuine philosophical consideration regarding how humanity should approach future challenges we might eventually encounter. "No," I answered finally. "Continued military advantage might have secured more favorable immediate terms, certainly, but genuine strength extends beyond simple military capability toward demonstrating wisdom sufficient to recognize when mercy and resolution serve our species better than endless pursuit of advantage alone. I paused, remembering grace, remembering everyone lost during those difficult years, remembering mocking broadcasts that had once declared humanity finished entirely. They mocked our loss, I continued, believing devastating circumstances had permanently diminished our species beyond recovery. We proved otherwise, not simply through military strength alone, but through demonstrating that humanity possessed both resilience and wisdom sufficient to transform devastating loss into genuine strength, ultimately choosing mercy over pure retribution when circumstances finally allowed us that choice. The young officer nodded thoughtfully, understanding evident in her expression as she considered these lessons that would guide her own future service, representing humanity among galactic civilizations that had once dismissed our species entirely. Following this address, I traveled once more toward Ardent Hollow's memorial site, standing quietly before Grace's name inscribed permanently among thousands of others lost during humanity's most devastating period. The colony itself had been rebuilt considerably during subsequent years, transformed from devastating ruins into a thriving settlement that honored everyone lost while demonstrating humanity's genuine capacity for renewal, following even the most catastrophic circumstances. "We made it," I said quietly, addressing memory of my sister who had never witnessed humanity's eventual transformation from mocked survivors into respected members of galactic civilization. Everything we endured, everything we lost, ultimately led towards something worth the sacrifice you made that day. Standing there, surrounded by evidence of humanity's remarkable journey from devastating loss toward genuine resolution and respect, I understood finally what those difficult years had truly taught our species. Mockery and dismissal, however painful during those darkest moments, had ultimately provided opportunity for humanity to demonstrate something far more significant than simple military capability alone. We had proven, through patience, sacrifice, and ultimately genuine wisdom regarding when mercy served better than continued retribution, that humanity deserved recognition not merely as survivors of devastating circumstances, but as a civilization capable of genuine greatness, worthy of the respect that species across the galaxy had once believed impossible for our kind to ever achieve. The stars above Ardent Hollow's memorial site remained the same stars that had witnessed humanity's devastating fall 6 years before our eventual transformation into something the galaxy could no longer afford to mock or dismiss. Standing beneath that same sky, I felt genuine peace settling over memories that had once carried only devastating grief, understanding finally that Grace's sacrifice, alongside everyone else lost during those difficult years, had ultimately contributed toward humanity's remarkable journey from mock defeat toward genuine, hard-earned respect among the stars we had always belonged among.